Hi, it's Corbett Harrison, and today I'm in this crystal ball not because I have all of the answers. I'm not Tiresias. I'm not some sage who can see into the future and predict what's going to work perfectly in every one of your lessons that you design. But I want to share the past, the present, and the future of some of the techniques I've used when designing units and lessons for my class. Today's topic is more techniques for essential questions, how to use inquiry as a basis for getting your students energized for your lesson and your unit objectives. If you took a look at my previous video on interactive learning objectives, you have explored some of the techniques that I've used over the years, and I want to present some newer ones I've been toying with and how I've been playing with them differently in this. Thus, the crystal ball. We are going to start with a quote. I've always believed there's a balance between science and artisticness when you are designing lessons. Within the research, you can find many answers for strategies that work, but just watching a skilled teacher at work, borrowing their techniques, that's the artistry side of teaching, and I've been fortunate to have both in my life, a pretty equal balance of research and of mentors who just showed me the way, showed me what it looks like when a teacher is, like the orchestra leader leading a class to discovering an objective, and question asking and question monitoring is something I really enjoyed doing when I was observing teachers, and it's a powerful technique. This quotation by Thomas Berger, he wrote Little Big Man, which became a great movie with Dustin Hoffman, but the concept of knowledge comes from the art and the science of asking questions. And to have art and science, it takes a lot of reading about techniques, but it also takes, the art side is you got to have a lot of practice and watch others at practice. And so hope to show you some of my techniques that I've used with students today. In the previous video, which was called Interactive Learning Objectives, I talked about the big three that I use when I design my own units and my own lessons. I use I cans or can I's. Sometimes I call them we can or can we's. But these are statements of the skills the students will be able to perform at the end of the unit or the lesson I have designed for them. When I create my I cans or my can I's, I pay very close attention to my Bloom's verbs. Very rarely will you see my best I can or can I with explain or identify. Those are very low on Bloom's, but to create through analysis, those are the top levels of my I can statements. I'm not saying that I don't have I can explain, I can identify. Those are the beginning sorts of questions you want them to answer before they can get to the ability to create things through analysis and comparison and contrast. I create those before I create my instruction because I want to know in my heart and in my head where I want my students to get to by the end of instruction. The other method that I use a lot of that I shared in my last video, I use McTighe and Wiggins' 6 Facets of Understanding. I like this because it's kind of Bloom's taxonomy-ish, and yet it's kind of different styles of thinking that aren't necessarily addressed in Bloom's. What I do with this technique is I create questions based on the 6 facets of understanding, as they call them, from explanation all the way up to self-knowledge, which are questions that would require different parts of the brain to activate in order to answer the question. And from the 6 questions that I create, sometimes I choose 3 of those to be my essential questions, sometimes I choose just 1 to be a driving question, but it helps me design questions that approach thinking about the topic from a different vantage point, the 6 facets of understanding. And then the last one I shared in my previous video, I call them 3-step essential questions, where you start with a question that they all can kind of answer because you're connecting it to something they've previously learned or previously have heard about. Then there are processing questions, the questions they should be able to ask or answer at the end of the specific lesson that you're working on. And finally, the transforming questions, which are put this information that you've just learned in a new context or in a future scenario. How's it going to make you think about something differently? And so I like that they're a little journey of questions, the 3-step essential questions. Those are the 3 I covered in the last video. I've got 2 more, which probably are better at the lesson level than the unit level, though I'm sure some of you will prove me wrong if you want to. I kind of use these next 2 techniques specifically in my lesson levels. Let's go back to another question. Here's an Egyptian author's quote about questions. He was a Nobel Prize winner. You can tell whether a man is clever by his answers. You can tell whether a man is wise by his questions. I had a student in my online class tell me it's very hard for me to write questions, and it used to be very hard for me to write questions. Question asking, quality question asking, is a skill that requires practice. And so I thought I'd throw this quote in here. I recently attended a conference where I got to go to a presentation by a gifted and talented author named Carolyn Coyle, and she has trademarked a term she calls questivities. It's very similar to understanding by design in that she starts with her standards. She then creates essential questions, a project, and a project rubric, and then to solidify her teaching, she builds questivity thinking questions is what she calls them. And what I like about them is she uses the same frame for these questions. There they are. It's 6 steps. They're not all questions, but 7 steps. But from listing to the question how at the end. And so let me show you what it actually looks like. So in an actual unit. So I'm going to let you pause and read this to yourself. If you there's a project activity, it comes with essential questions, and then she uses those 7 frames to design questions she's going to ask throughout the learning. Do me a favor and pause the video now and take a close look, and look for comparisons to the Understanding by Design model should you be familiar with that particular model. I'll let you pause now. And we're back. This is an interesting technique to me. It's going to be one of the new techniques I try in the future with my students. I liked the idea that there are question frames, because one of my ultimate goals in my classroom is I want my students to ultimately learn the routines and the patterns that I follow so that they can imitate those patterns themselves. And I saw a lot of potential in this, whereas if I was to design numerous lessons where those sentence frames from list to how, if those sentence frames were ones that I constantly use, ultimately I could have students start creating the exact same set of questions for each other in projects where I'm asking them to construct knowledge and teach each other information, whether it be a jigsaw or a research project where each student's supposed to teach on a different topic. I thought those would be excellent sentence frames for the students to become familiar enough with themselves so that they could imitate them during a project after they had seen me expose them to them several times. Diane Sawyer's quote, I won't read it to you. It's important, I think, to come up with many questions when building inquiry-based learning, and then having the ability to choose the very best ones. Again, the 6 facets of understanding, the explanation through the self-knowledge questions from McTighe and Wiggins. I brainstorm 6 in order to often choose the 2 or the 3 or the 4 best ones that I'm going to use. Scamper, I hope most of you are familiar with Scamper, but I want to share how I use Scamper. Scamper is an acronym that gives you the verbs that you see listed there, but after you've learned about a topic, to present a scamper concept to students, it requires them to creatively think or rethink something that they now have learned about. And if you want to pause and look specifically at those questions, I'm going to share with you how I introduce this concept to my students so that they can scamper things that we become familiar with in class. I'm moving on now. In case you wanted to pause, you should do it before I hit the space bar. First of all, I recently saw on the news the ham dog has now been created, and you have to wonder how ideas like these come about. It's because people get used to the concept of scampering. You take something that you know, a hamburger and a hot dog, and with the verbs, clearly with a ham dog, we have combined, adapted. We had to adapt and combine a bun that would fit the combination, but that's often the sort of creative thinking you see in the world when new products and innovations come about. My students like to think about food. They complain when food are on my slides because they get very hungry while I'm showing them these examples. But food is a really great place to go if you're trying to teach them Scamper. Here's how I introduce Scamper to my students. We all know and love pizza. My kids would be groaning right now because they would claim they were hungry. But I asked my students to go through the 7 verbs in Scamper and to come up with different ideas for pizza. And the great thing about pizza is it's been done to death, in fact. So if we were to substitute pizza, let's say we substituted fruit for the meat and cheese. People have done this. They've invented something called the fruit pizza. New concept thanks to Scamper. Let's go to combine. Pizza with egg rolls got combined quite a while ago. I personally find them disgusting, but my students will devour them. But pizza rolls came from 2 things being combined that people liked to eat. Adapt. If you don't think there's enough cheese on your pizza, well, go ahead and stuff it in your crust. That's become an adaptation of pizza common in modern days. If you magnify, let's say you really like pizza, but you really like the meat on the pizza, well, good. Now there's meat lovers pizza. And if you wanted to modify pizza, let's make the world's most gigantic pizza. Been done to death, but these are people who've taken the Scamper verbs to heart as they're showing their innovations. Put to other use, this is a great one. Did you know there's a pizza sleeping bag? There is. Alright, but the pizza sleeping bag was taking pizza and let's put it to another use. Eliminate or minify. Gluten-free pizza is now big. It's also white sauce pizza, which maybe would be an adaptation, not an elimination, but let's pretend people didn't like all that tomato sauce. Well, now we've got white sauce pizzas that taste very different. And then there is actually a thing called a reverse deep dish pizza, if you want to rearrange or reverse an idea where the cheese is underneath and the sauce is on the top. People have innovated for years, and Scamper is a great acronym to teach your students in order to get them to think these ways. We want our students to be innovators and creators, that highest level of Bloom's. Scamper is a really great place to build questions for students, and so let us Scamper. Let's say you were just doing a unit with your student on art and art appreciation. Here in Nevada, we have the Nevada Museum of Art, and once they've learned perhaps about a current exhibit there, you challenge them with the idea that you want the museum to be able to increase attendance or interest. Scamper it. What could we substitute at the museum to get more people there? What could we magnify at the museum to get more people there? What could we eliminate at the museum to get more people there? It becomes project-based thinking about a topic that you've studied in class. Same thing if park in your town is poorly attended park, and you've just studied civics and civic design. All of these verbs could be applied and create questions. How could we adapt this park? How could we put it to other use? How could we rearrange or reverse ideas? Students like the idea of being able to Scamper, and there's just another option for it. We have a ukulele festival in Reno, apparently, and I would have to imagine, don't shoot me if I'm wrong, but I would have to imagine that it probably could use a little more attendance. But so what could we do to make substitutes or eliminate or magnify certain things, and working on a unit on entrepreneurship or festival creation? I'm not sure, but entrepreneurship is probably a great one there. How could you make more money with this festival by using the Scamper verbs? Let's say you were designing or creating a unit on, let's modify transportation to create a new form of transportation. We've studied modes of transportation and the history. Now let's modify it. Here are questions. Feel free to pause, but these are great driving questions that could get students to ponder and innovate with new designs and new ideas. And I will end with this quote by Terry Gross from NPR. I think we need to turn our students into people who are really curious and constantly slightly confused. That way, they'll always be able to ask good questions. Scamper, a great way to do that. And remember, good questions outrank easy answers. Have